All right, greetings everyone. My name is Sarah Barnes, and on behalf of Campbell & Company, it is my pleasure to welcome you to Keeping Donors Engaged Through Good Times and Bad, the second of our 2011-2012 Campbell & Company webinar series. Before we begin today's interesting presentation and discussion with our panel, I'd like to quickly review some logistics for those of you who may be new to Campbell & Company webinars. To ensure you have the best webinar experience possible, please follow these tips. First, close any programs, other than of course GoToMeeting or GoToTraining, that are running on your computer. You can call in using a telephone instead of your computer speakers. That usually helps with the sound much better. And also, please move away any cell phone that is near your computer that can interfere with bandwidth issues. If you're having sound issues, or if you're still having sound issues, please call in using the telephone option on the right side. And if you experience any visual issues, send a chat to Campbell & Company. You may also contact GoToTraining at 1-800-263-6317. Finally, today's webinar will last 60 minutes and you will earn 1 continuing education credits for your participation, good for certification with CFRE International. About an hour after the webinar, you will receive an email from GoToWebinars that includes a web address to download your certificate, the PDF of the presentation, as well as a code to receive a complimentary registration for our next webinar. And now I'd like to take a moment to introduce Edith Falk. Edith Falk is the Chair and CEO of Campbell & Company, and her career in institutional advancement spans more than 30 years. She has provided strategic counsel on fundraising and marketing communications for many of our leading national organizations and institutions across the country in the arts, healthcare, education, human services, and the environment. Edith currently serves as the chair of the Giving USA Foundation Board. So without further ado, I'd like to turn it over to Edith. Edith?
Thank you, Sarah, and welcome to everyone on the webinar. We're happy to have you here today. We're going to start with a short history lesson. If you're on the slide 4, it says Rome wasn't built in a day. We all know that. And neither is the donor pyramid. Building a donor pyramid takes lots of work by many people, development staff, your CEO, and other senior staff and board members. It takes a lot of work over time to engage your donors and move them to higher levels of giving. It requires a plan, a team of people, and the right infrastructure to support that activity. And that's what we're going to talk about today. So whether your donor pyramid looks like this, kind of narrow on the bottom and goes straight up and maybe has a little bit narrower top, or looks like this. And we see a lot of donor pyramids that look like this. A lot of donors at the bottom, some really good donors at the top, but kind of narrow in the middle. Your job as a development professional is building a solid donor pyramid. Now, hopefully, most of you are familiar with the concept of the donor pyramid. And as this shape suggests, not every donor has the ability or the inclination to give at increasingly higher levels. And not every donor enters at the bottom of the pyramid and moves up sequentially from one level to another. Sometimes people begin supporting your institution with a major annual gift, and maybe they'll then jump to writing a capital gift with your organization, or sometimes they just start at the bottom and gradually work their way up. But your ultimate goal is to increase the lifetime value of your donor base by engaging a sufficient number of donors to consider increasing levels of support and to consider multiple gifts on an annual basis or become multi-year donors, and eventually to include the organization in his or her estate plans, the ultimate gift. So today's webinar is a conversation with 2 individuals who are consummate professionals and among the best relationship managers I know. Let's see. Okay, sorry, we're having a momentary delay here in advancing the slides. Let me just go back a slide. Okay. So we have 2 terrific professionals with us today who are the consummate relationship managers among the many other things that they do. So let me introduce our 2 special guests here. First, Brooke Walters, the Director of Institutional Advancement at the Chicago Shakespeare Theater, one of Chicago's and the nation's premier theater companies. Prior to joining Chicago Shakespeare Theater last year, Brooke spent 7 seasons with another iconic Chicago theater, Steppenwolf Theater, most recently as Director of Nature Gifts. Her entire professional career has been in the performing arts, including positions with Ravinia Festival and the Santa Fe Opera. Our second special guest today is Greg Cameron, Chief Operating Officer with WTTW WFMT. WTTW is Chicago's premier public broadcasting station, and WFMT, is our classical music station. And there, Greg oversees development and communications, along with other operations at the station. Previously, Greg was Deputy Director and Chief Development Officer at the Museum of Contemporary Art in Chicago. He's also a board member of the Young Women's Leadership Charter School and the Center on Halsted, and is active in a number of other nonprofit organizations. So he's going to share his perspective both as a development professional as well as a volunteer. So before we move on, let me just ask Brooke to say a few words about the fundraising program at Chicago Shakespeare, and then I'm going to ask Greg to do the same so we have a context in which to have our discussion.
Sure.
Brooke?
Thank you, Edith, and thank you to Campbell and Company for including us on this webinar. The program at Chicago Shakespeare Theater includes gifts, as most of our peers do, from individuals, corporate, foundation, and government sector. The individual giving base is the lion's share of where our support is coming from. We have a strong annual fund program that focuses on gifts, primarily coming in through direct mail, online, and we have just launched this year our first outbound call center. Our focus on major gifts has been what has sort of advanced our fundraising efforts most rapidly during our first quarter century. We are just celebrating our 25th anniversary season this year. And we have a very robust program of donors both at the Bard Circle level, which for us is $1,000 and above, and the Shakespeare Society, which is $25,000 and above.
Great, thank you, Brooke. And Greg, fill us in on your program.
Sure. We, as Edith has said, we are a public television station and a classical music station. In WFMT, we have a commercial radio license, but we run the organization as a nonprofit. And much like the Shakespeare Theater, we receive most of our support from individuals. I think any of you that are avid PBS watchers in the various cities where you live see the thanks to and viewers like you. And the lion's share of our support comes from individuals giving as little as $40 a year up to individual major gifts into the 7-figure range, both for annual support as well as at the higher levels for restricted project support. We do receive government support. I think one of the big myths is that the government support is rather modest in the grand scheme of things. So it's central to us to develop and expand and move people up that development pyramid. On the individual side, we also receive corporate support, both corporate philanthropic support, as well as relationships that we have with corporations through advertising. On the television side, we don't do advertisements, we do spots, which means there might be a, quote, commercial, but there can be no call to action, no price mentioned, and we also do that on the radio side. And then, of course, foundation support is incredibly important to our production side. And lots of the shows that we produce locally, and certainly on the national PBS front, foundations are critical to our success.
Great, thank you. So as you can hear, obviously we have representatives from 2 organizations that operate development programs that kind of span the gamut from very small donors to very major donors, and we're really going to benefit from the experience of these 2 individuals with us today. So why does this matter? Well, as you can see here, as you add donors to the top of your funnel, if I can use that analogy here, you are constantly losing donors out the bottom of the funnel. So we constantly have to be replacing donors who, for a variety of reasons, decide that they're not able to support you any longer. And for those of you who are more visual people, and for those of you who are more data-driven people rather than visual people, let me just give you a few data points to help you understand why thinking about the lifetime value of donors is really so important, and helping to think about the continuum of donors is so important. So keep that analogy of the funnel in mind, but here's just a couple of other things to think about, and I've referred to these as the economics of loyalty. And one of the factors here is that a 10% improvement in attrition can yield a 200% increase in projected value. So if you can just plug up that funnel and keep 10% more of those donors from leaving you, ultimately that's going to have a very beneficial effect on the organization, support. Here's another factoid to keep in mind. It typically costs 5 times as much to acquire a new donor as to do business with an existing one. So obviously, once you've brought that donor in the front door, you want to keep that donor engaged, happy, and very pleased about the experience that they're having with your organization, because it's a whole lot less expensive to renew them than to bring in a new donor. And then one other piece of evidence, this is from a target analytics study that was done a couple of years ago that looked at giving to public universities, and it looked at sort of the transition in donors from lower-level donors to upper-level donors. And when they looked back over the years, they saw that on average, it took 13.2 years for a donor to make a first gift of $1,000. So that just, I think, reminds us all of that image of the donor pyramid. Somebody may come in as a member of your organization, or a theater goer, or a listener, and it may take you a long time to move them from that first gift to that from their very first gift to a $1,000 or above gift. But in the end, it really starts to pay off. So of those donors who made a first-time gift of $1,000 or more, 57% of them made a first gift of less than $100. And of those that gave $1,000 or more, a 100 first-time donor did so at a 30% faster rate than a $1 to $24 donor. So that's just some of the information that we need to remember as we move forward here. So how do we plug that funnel? Well, here are the steps that we're going to talk about. We have to build awareness. We have to engage those donors. We have to move them to the point where they feel like they're truly investors in the organization and ultimately partners with you in supporting the organization. I'm going to call your attention to the little box on the lower left-hand side. We're going to open up this session for questions in the last 10 minutes or so. So as you have questions, please go ahead and enter those questions in the chat box on the right-hand side of your screen, and we'll try to get to as many of those as we can when we're coming into the home stretch here. So why do individual donors, and we're really going to focus mostly on individual donors here, even though I know all of your programs include both corporate support and foundation support, and to a much lesser extent government support. But why do individual donors stop giving to the organization? Here's some information from a report that was done by Judith Nichols called Pinpointing Influence. And out of every 100 donors who stopped giving to an organization, 4 moved away or died. Not a whole lot you can do about that. 15 decided to make a gift elsewhere. Well, that's a little disappointing. There was some reason that caused them to stop supporting you, but rather make their charitable contributions somewhere else. 15 are unhappy with the organization. Gosh, we sure don't want that to happen. And 66% think you don't care about them. So this is obviously something that we need to do something about. Well, we can't exactly send flowers or candy to every new donor, but there clearly are steps that we can take to make donors feel welcome from the very earliest stages of their engagement with the organization. Brooke, I know Chicago Shakespeare Theater and you in particular are engaged with your donors in a number of different ways. Talk a little bit about how you make a first-time donor really feel special
Right. Well, thank you, Edith. I think the first thing that we try to do is make sure that the communications to them after their first gift are personalized. That instead of, and Penelope Burke did a lot of work with this around donor-centered fundraising, that the standard or rote acknowledgement letter is not enough in this day and age. So both acknowledging in the context of that letter that this is their first gift and making a personalized note there, welcoming them to the family of supporters. We really try and make sure that people understand that we are all in this together. And then we try and track, and I know several institutions have moved to this model of making sure that at the first activity or series of activities, whether it's a donor event or we're lucky enough to be a performing arts institution, so we have people coming through our doors for shows 3 to 5 times a year if they're subscribers, making sure that they feel welcomed and acknowledged for that deepening engagement that they have done through making a gift to the organization. So it's really about connecting with that individual and personalizing their relationship. And then before we ask for a renewed or increased gift, ensuring that we have demonstrated the case for support, what their gift has done relative to impact. Now, whether that's through an electronic communication or a letter or that personal interaction, really reaffirming that we're saying thank you before we get back to saying please.
So, Brooke, you have the advantage of having a theater, and people come to the theater. So
Right.
you actually greet your donors
That's right.
when they come for a live performance.
We do, and we've just instituted that this year, that where a member of our advancement team is at the theater for every performance, ensuring that all of our donors are greeted and acknowledged, thanked for their participation. I think one of the things in your previous slide, the donors who decided to make a gift elsewhere, my sort of strategy for combating that behavior is to make sure that they understand that they are a valuable part of our fabric of how our organization is built, and that when they make us a priority, that makes a direct impact on our ability to serve as a cultural institution and engage this broader community of Chicago in the work of Shakespeare. In terms of those folks who are unhappy with the organization, when you feel uncertain or unhappy about something, you want to be able to know that your voice is heard and your concern can be voiced. So we find that there are several people who have been grateful that this interaction at the theater gave them the opportunity to actually express to us some things that they weren't necessarily happy about. Things in some cases that had been happening for a few years, and now we have the opportunity to make that right and hopefully change their pattern or their behavior, perhaps supporting another organization or thinking that we don't care about them.
And we'll come back in a few minutes and talk about some other strategies that might engage donors in having that two-way dialogue with you, particularly if they have something on their mind that they want to share with you. Greg, share with us some of the things that, pick one or two things that you do that you feel is particularly effective in helping donors feel welcome.
Sure. Well, and before I do that, I want to say that I've had first-hand experience with Brooke as a donor to the Steppenwolf Theater, and I can attest to what she's saying she does, and it really, it does make a difference in feeling that sort of personal connection. One of the interesting aspects of my work in the space of public television after many years of working in a museum where you had visitors or donors coming to a physical space to experience the mission is that we take our mission to you. And people are watching television, listening to the radio in the privacy of their own home, on their handheld device, in their car. So we have to work a little harder to really connect in that person-to-person space. And what we have started doing is placing phone calls, thank you phone calls. Oftentimes, of course, we don't reach people firsthand, but we leave a message, and it's a message saying thank you for your gift, not a phone solicitation. And I can't tell you how impactful that has been when it's been time to renew somebody. Not only does the person that get the call appreciate it, but I've had people come back to me saying, oh, so-and-so told me that they got a call from you or they got a call from someone on your staff. And we're doing this with every single gift that we get, from the $40 on up. We have a customer service team that manages all of the membership relationships and manages our television pledge activities. So we have the people on staff to do that. And my feeling is, that if we can invest the amount of money and time in doing phone solicitations and working that angle, that we can also make that investment in a quick phone call, excuse me, to say thank you. Other activities that we need to do is, we have to create events. By nature, our mission isn't about events, but creating special events and opportunities for our members and our donors to have access to some of the public television celebrities, if you will, the talent. Ken Burns recently was in Chicago for the premiere of Prohibition, which I hope some of you saw. And we partnered with the Art Institute of Chicago to host a preview screening for our membership. And within about 3 hours, those 900 seats were completely filled. But it was an opportunity for us to bring our viewers together, to give them access to Ken, to let them see something before they saw it on the air, for us to thank them, but also for Ken Burns to thank them for their support. We did smaller, more intimate events with major donors over lunch, and then an evening event with about 30 people that was even smaller and more intimate. So it's sort of the staging of, giving people access to things that they wouldn't have access to if they were not involved at a level of support, and have certainly found those events to be central in engaging donors, but also then in thanking donors. The people that we had at the Ken Burns Luncheon were donors that had supported other programs, but that we knew had a particular interest or affinity for Ken Burns programming. And that was late September that we did these series of events, and already we have secured a new $50,000 contribution from somebody that was at that luncheon. That
Great,
was
that's phenomenal. Yeah, and we're going to talk a little bit more about events and special activities for donors, that events that they the kinds of things that they might not otherwise have access to. But I want to just back up and comment on the fact that you make phone calls to donors to say thank you, even at the lowest level. And that's just amazing. But really what that says, and that reflects back to the slide where we talk about donors who don't feel valued, that immediately sends a message to them that there's someone on the other end of the line, someone at your organization who recognizes that they've made a gift and would notice if they didn't repeat that gift next year.
And
So,
Edith, and just want to add, the calls don't just come from me or from the development team, but we have, the hosts of the radio show, the hosts of Chicago Tonight, which was a nightly news show that we produce, pick up the call and make calls to major donors. And that is incredibly impactful. A call from a development staff person is maybe expected. A call from somebody that is an artist really makes a difference.
I think that's phenomenal when you can get other people on your organizational staff involved, the people who are really involved with the content of your work, and get them to pick up the phone and make calls. Not only does that help them understand the work that you do as development officers, but it's really impactful interaction with your donor. Greg, this next slide is for you, and it's about the use of premiums to tchotchke or not to tchotchkes. This is an area where there's a lot of controversy. Is this worth the time and energy? Is it worth the expense? I know the stations use premium. Do you want to say a word about how that works for you?
Sure. In the space of television pledge drives, the the tchotchke is certainly the driving factor in the decision of people to pick up the phone and make a contribution, if you will call it a contribution. What's happening in the PBS system across the country is that we're finding that television pledge drives are really almost exclusively transactional now. So somebody is not thinking that they're making a gift, they are making a purchase. And I certainly think that what's happened in our lives, way beyond home shopping, but the way that we can immediately go online and purchase something, has had an impact on the pledge drive. So the tchotchkes that become part of a pledge drive do, motivate a gift, but the cost is very, very high. So we're doing lots of analysis and really looking closely at how we use gifts on the pledge side of what we do. Switching channels back to, just an individual donor, and I'm talking about maybe a donor that's, giving $500 or $1,000. As we get to know those individuals, we do have the opportunity to send them DVDs, to share things with them about their interests. And in the space of public television, we're the encyclopedia. So our mission is so broad that if I know a particular donor is interested in a subject area, I can send them a Ken Burns DVD. I can send them something that we've produced about Chicago. And the cost to us is very, very low. The production of a DVD is quite minimal, and we have seen the return on that modest investment in being able to build a relationship and let someone know that we do pay attention and we are aware of what they're particularly interested in has gone a long way for us. Even, sending we have a daily email that announces what is going to be covered on our 1-hour Chicago Tonight show that's from 7 to 8 p.m., 5 to 6 segments covering things from culture and politics and the environment in Chicago, and just forwarding that email along to somebody saying, dear so-and-so, I know that you're interested in the state of the Chicago Public Schools. I hope you can tune in tonight. If not, click on this link and you can have access to that content. There's absolutely no cost to us, and it goes a long, long way. Certainly in the space of children's programming, 12 hours a day, we dedicate our airwaves to quality, nutritious television. Little Elmos go a long way to bringing smiles to the faces of parents and little kids, and to the extent that we can use our WTTW Kids characters to engage families and parents and grandparents and giving more, we certainly do that and get high marks for it.
Greg, you really do have some wonderful examples there, and a lot of what you're able to share with your donors is very content connected. It's very mission connected to what people hear and see on television and on radio, which is terrific. I just want to just speak for a few minutes about the importance of trust and what we know both anecdotally and from the literature, that a key to building a donor loyalty is building trust. And there are a few factors for us to keep in mind as we think about that. One is kind of a clear statement of values. And when I think about that in the context of TTW, for example, when you turn on TV, when you turn on WTTW, you know you're going to see a program worth watching. When you turn into the evening news program, Chicago Tonight uses this reference, you know you're going to hear a thoughtful, unbiased presentation of the most important news of the day. I think the same thing is true when you go to Chicago Shakespeare. You know you're going to see a production that's exciting, thought-provoking, and exceptionally well done. And as Chicago Shakespeare's marketing, for those of you who are listening who are in Chicago and have seen that, it shakes your soul. So, I mean, those are very clear expressions of the values that are key to each of these organizations. I think another element in building trust is to help the organization, help your donors really understand that you've made effective use of funds. And both of you have talked about the importance of communicating to your donors about how their funds are used, and we're actually going to talk a little bit more about that in a minute. Transparent communication with respect to impact, and certainly there's a lot that you can do. Greg, you just talked about using email to keep people informed about things that are coming up that they might want to be tuned into. I know I just got an email from Chicago Shakespeare about the upcoming production that's opening up in a few weeks, telling me I really don't want to miss this, and I probably don't. I should go there. It's about establishing a two-way dialogue with donors and finding opportunities to engage with them face-to-face or through email. It's about communications that are authentic, and probably even more important is just what I call plain old-fashioned customer service. And I know, Brooke, when we were preparing for this webinar, you talked about the importance of customer service. Talk a little bit about how that plays out in the theater.
Well, I mean, I think one of the things that Chris Henderson and Barbara Gaines, our founding executive and artistic directors, have always believed in is that when you come to Chicago Shakespeare Theater, you should have no barriers between you and the artistic experience, and you should feel that you've come home. And so I know from the very moment you step through our doors, we try and be highly attentive to every aspect of your experience. And we try to reflect that through all of our programs, including our giving programs. So, you know, what we have done is ensured that we've built a team of individuals who are well-versed in every aspect of the theater, that we have an awareness not only of the depth of program, but that on a regular basis we sit down with our team to ensure that we're on point. And you know, I hate to admit that I perhaps took a page out of the political playbook with this, but you know, we wanted to make sure that we had 3 key talking points that we could reaffirm throughout the institution with our advancement team and with other members. For example, this week, you know, we're ensuring that all of our customer interactions include the great news about Follies, our recent production, which just closed, which ran to sold-out houses, and only 50% of those folks who saw the show were subscribers. So we introduced a whole new constituency into our theater. Our program, CPS Shakespeare, which unites an ensemble of teams and educators to produce their own production with the full complement of artistic resources, just happened and is featured at the NCTE conference this week. And our artistic director, Barbara Gaines, has just started a rehearsal for Elizabeth Rex. This will be her first production since she directed Macbeth at Lyric Opera last season, so we're very excited about that coming up. But ensuring that level, that there is a consistent and clear communication, that donors are fully engaged, and that they are listened to and responded to in a very efficient manner is something that we try and ensure across the organization.
Yeah, thank you. I love the notion of having key talking points that you change on a regular basis so that your conversations are always fresh and engaging. And I know a number of you who are listening in on the phone represent very different kinds of organizations, educational organizations, human service organizations. We're talking a lot here more about the performing arts or cultural organizations, although TTW and Chicago Shakespeare are certainly educational. But I hope you can see the connection between what Brooke and Greg are able to do in their own shops and make the translation to your own organizations, and think of ways that you can engage your donors in meaningful two-way conversations. One of the questions that we always have is, sorry, my mouse goes to sleep here and I can't advance the slides. One of the questions we always have is, how do we know where to really focus our attention? And what you see here in the bubble chart on this slide are a number of different methodologies that you can use to identify those donors who have a likelihood to upgrade. And certainly with some of the new technology on the market and the services that are provided by Convio and Blackbaud and Wealth Engine and others, wealth screening and predictive modeling are available to so many more of us at a very reasonable price, and they're very user-friendly. But even without those tools, there are a lot of other things that we can do we certainly always want to be paying attention to the donor's history with the organization, how long have they been giving, how recently have they given, and at what levels, and there are certain indicators that come with that. The other activity that they have with your organization, are they a volunteer, are they a docent, are they a tutor in your school program? We certainly know from the literature that people who volunteer with an organization have a much higher tendency to support that organization. You can bring your volunteers together for some peer screening and literally sit down with them and review names. Certainly looking at the philanthropy to others, and probably all of us as development officers are guilty of when we go to the symphony or the theater or some other place that has Prince Alive program, instead of looking at the program for that evening, we read the donor list, kind of an occupational hazard that we all seem to have. But Greg, I know the stations have just completed an electronic screening and predictive modeling process, but even before that, can you just share a few thoughts with us about what are some of the markers, or what have been some of the markers for you of donors that you think or know have the capacity to upgrade?
Sure, and as Edith said, I can't speak in detail about wealth screening, but it's something that we have just completed and certainly will be part of our portfolio going forward. In the 4 years that I've been, or almost 4 years that I've been here at WTTW and WFMT, I've spent a great amount of time understanding and listening to our board members and our individual donors about their past giving, and looking at their past giving and trying to use it as a guide to understand how we might move them along into project support. And frankly, when I arrived here, most of the individual giving was very specific to annual fund support. And I quickly realized that if we were going to be successful in doing what we wanted to do, and if we were going to engage people and give them the opportunity, I think people are looking, people want to be asked to support things that they care about. Rarely do I sit down with somebody and ask them to support something that I don't know they're engaged and interested in. And I think that, that sort of hits so many of these little circles on this chart, certainly looking at philanthropy to others. We're in the process of completing and will be broadcasting a documentary called Chicago's Loop. It'll be an 80-minute walking tour of Chicago that will be broadcast right after Thanksgiving. Of course, this is about the central business district of the city. It's about the history of Chicago, the built environment, the history of the skyscraper. So of course we're going to look to the Chicago Architecture Foundation. We're going to look to the Architecture Committee at the Art Institute to identify people that are interested in architecture, that are interested in urban planning and interested in the city, and then look to see, what has this person's relationship or giving history been with WTTW. And I can tell you in most cases we looked at those lists and rarely had any of them given anything to WTTW, and I can tell you that people hadn't given because they'd never been asked to give. And
the number one reason why people don't give.
Right. And with with some people we were able to have conversations and quickly take somebody from someone that had never been a donor to a $10,000 entry-level gift, which is quite exciting. Other people we had conversations with, and they were excited to hear about what we were doing, but not quite ready, to enter into the project support aspect of what we do. But I think it really is a combination of being attentive to what people are interested in and looking at both their involvement with your organization, but their involvement with multiple organizations in Chicago. And then we often are partnering. The Chicago Architecture Foundation is a partner with us on the Chicago's Loop Tour. So we're connecting, their donors, their members with, our broader mission So it just keeps expanding the pool. They can tap into, our donor base and vice versa.
I want to jump in. I want to jump in, Greg, and just say I think right that there is a philosophy too that it's a marathon, not a sprint, right? Because I know you're so great at this. You might be prospecting someone for a particular project, and as you said, they might not be ready or their interests might not align now. But that doesn't mean that 3 years down the road you might not have the right thing. So I think that's also such an exciting part of our job, right? Is that we get to meet with these people and discover what their connectivity is with the work that we're trying to promote, and then figure out whether it's now or in the future how we can work together to realize the vision of the institution.
So it's a little bit like moving an elephant.
Subtle transition.
Okay, so moving people up the donor pyramid isn't quite as hard as getting an elephant to move forward, although I'm sure we've all had days or donors that make us feel like we're moving an elephant. But you're absolutely right. It really is a marathon, and it is something that happens over time. I want to just share with you one very simple tool that you can use to make sure you're on track with donors, and this is probably more for lower level donors, and that's to do a survey. Just ask them how satisfied they are with the services you're providing them. It can be an online survey, it can be a written survey. You may want to just take a couple questions and include that on your pledge card. Make it simple. Don't give them a lot of things to think about, but just a few things that you want, on which you want their feedback. Are you giving them enough choice in terms of the communications they receive? Do they feel they're being thanked appropriately? Are you giving them opportunities to be involved in other ways? People love to tell you how they want to interact with your organization. So you can do that as a written survey or an electronic survey, or questions like these are really good questions for you to use when you're having individual conversations with donors.
Now that we've used this a little bit in educating, so we frame the question not only to elicit their feedback, but also to say, did you realize that this is part of your benefit as a donor that they might not know? So figuring out a way to frame those questions in the right way can be not only get you feedback, but also educate the audience about the benefit of their giving.
Yeah, good point.
Well, and I think too, I think doing surveying is wonderful, but then making sure that you really analyze the data and implement the changes. I think it's so easy to ask questions and then not really listen, and I think it's so incredibly important that we not only listen, but we hear what the donors are saying. And with major donors, you can't use the cookie cutter approach. Everybody wants to be valued and respected in a different way, and it's the fun part of our work, I think. Which you create relationships based on trust and respect and genuine interest. And to the extent that happens, I think you only see the gifts increase and the commitment, move in the direction that you want.
And the other thing, the other point I would make in conjunction with that is that you've got to record that data. I mean, you both may have wonderful memories, I think you do, but you may not be there forever, or someone else may take over the management of that prospect. So that information about a donor's interests or how they want to be engaged with the organization or what they like or don't like has to be in their records.
That's right. And if my staff hears me say, please do your contact logs one more time, they might, their heads might start spinning. But I agree, Edith, that creating that institutional knowledge and really making it personal, having the data there, but really bringing the story to life in the records is something that is such a benefit to you as a development officer. If you walk into a new position and that is at your fingertips, your learning curve in terms of who those donors are and who they are beyond the data is really a great gift that we can give to the next generation of leaders of our organizations.
So we touched on this a minute ago about the special treatment for very special donors, but donors really want experiences that they couldn't have on their own, and the most And the experiences that really engage them with the work of the organization are probably the most powerful of those experiences. So no matter what your organization is, there's a way to connect the donor to your organization, whether it's a site visit to see that the work that you're doing in the community, or bringing them to a place where your beneficiaries can interact with them and talk about what a meaningful experience being a part of the organization, whether it's an educational organization or an arts organization, what that's meant for them. But it's really about helping donors understand that their gifts have made a difference. So I'm going to ask Brooke and Greg both to maybe just think about one example where you've really been able to engage a donor in an experience. Well, Greg, you just talked about this a minute ago with the $50,000 check that came as a result of an interaction with Ken Burns. But how do you really help donors understand that their gifts make a difference? And I'm going to alert our webinar audience, and in about 3 minutes we're going to start taking your questions. So please use the chat box on the right-hand side of your screen to send those questions to us, and we'll take as many as we can. Brooke, do you want to give an educational program? There are a lot of things that you do in the community.
Sure, and I think, you know, it's when we think about these opportunities, I'm going to step back for a second and just tell you sort of what we do in terms of the benefit structure, and then opening these up. You know, the things that I want to make sure that the benefits we offer do 3 things. They raise awareness of our programs, the broad spectrum of programs. They reinforce the case for support through direct interaction and connectivity to our artists and program officers. And then they give us the opportunity to be in dialogue with them. So it's a bit of what Greg was talking about earlier about taking his work out of the studio and living into the community or in the proximity to the donors themselves. So, and I would say that what has been a challenge in doing this, and not, you know, we don't have the tchotchke system of benefits. We only have experiential benefits at Chicago Shakespeare Theater. So it's really re-examining the things that we do on a daily basis that could be of interest. So for example, we have a thing that we do in the theater world called a technical rehearsal, which to us in the theater world is a bit like watching paint dry. It's a 12-hour day where we literally have, you know, the lights, the sound, the choreography, the costumes, everything comes together for the first time. And the actors are not acting. They are blocking through their motions while we get all these technical elements in place. Having a donor come in and sit beside the director at that tech table and see all of these different elements and all of the artisans. I mean, for Follies alone that we just produced, we had over 40 artists, 12 musicians, 30 actors. We had a team of over 80 artisans and artists working on this production, not to mention the administrative staff. They could see behind the curtain into the living experience of what it's like to stage that production. And not only has the donor who joined us for that, you know, we're in dialogue about increasing support, but they now are the biggest advocate for that sort of seemingly unknown, you know, what it takes to produce a production holistically that you might not know, and now are speaking to others with us about that element of the case for support for really funding the work on our stages.
That's really a great example, and you know, I think sometimes we forget that we need to continue to educate our board members about the work that we do. And Greg, I know you recently invited your entire board to come sit through a live broadcast of Chicago Tonight. I think for some of them it was the first time they had ever watched that broadcast happen, and it was kind of magical.
Yeah, well, and the wonderful thing about that was we've had significant resistance from the production team to really have live audiences in the studio, and it was so incredibly successful that the next day the executive producer of the show called me and said, Greg, you know, can we figure out a way to do this once a month? And I'm like, of course, we could deliver a very, very excited and diverse audience once a month. And that is an experience that, you know, you can't get anywhere else. It's very different than sitting at home and watching it on your television. And we have the same opportunities on the radio. We have a studio, the Levin Studio here up at WFMT, where we do a program called Impromptu. And when visiting artists are in Chicago, performing at the Lyric Opera, performing at the CSO, Music of the Baroque, the wide range of Chicago's music community, we bring musicians into the studio and they perform live on the radio. They're interviewed by a host. Well, we can assemble in that studio 15 to 40 seats, and depending on who the artist is and what our intended goal is with that high-touch moment, we might invite one person to be in the studio with Yo-Yo Ma while he's performing and somebody is interviewing him. You know, that's an experience that you can't buy. We might
No
use
kidding.
we might use it, you know, with a group of 15 or 20 donors. And what I tell my colleagues constantly is doing all of these events are wonderful, and inviting people to come and have this experience is great, but what's your follow-up plan? Why are you doing this? You know, we've got to make sure that there is a strategy beyond just saying, oh, it would be nice to invite, you know, Mr. and Mrs. So-and-so to come for this performance. I mean, I believe in inviting people and being nice, but I think given the limited amount of time that we have, the human resources and financial resources that we have available to us, there needs to be, you know, a strategy and a plan. And then it really becomes an exciting opportunity for them to have experienced it, but their sense of ownership and connection then can translate back into making an even more significant impact on our ability to program by, you know, at the appropriate time, asking them for a gift.
Well, and you're making a really important point about having a plan, really kind of knowing where you're going with that donor. And I think there's another concept really embedded in that, and that is, what is the return on investment? I mean, what kind of time and energy and resources are you putting into this donor or group of donors, and how do you know that it's paying off for you? Or when do you make the decision that it's not paying off and decide, you know, I'm not sure I can move this person any further?
Yeah, I think that is...
That's a tough one, because I know as development officers we're all kind of optimistic, and we never really want to admit that there's not another step we can take with someone.
It also becomes about priority, right? I mean,
Yeah.
and figuring out, that's why, you know, it is that balance that we need to strike as development officers of spending time with strategy and planning, and then being out there engaging, thinking, and asking. And so, you know, I think that if you take enough time to, with your colleagues and the executive leadership of your institution, plan a thoughtful strategy that clearly prioritizes the areas that have the greatest potential for growth, then you'll have sort of a roadmap and an internal compass to know, you know, which segments and what type of giving do you need to put more emphasis on. You know, for example, are you losing more of your first-year donors than you should be? Then a first-year donor plan might be more of a priority than, you know, trying to grow donor from X level to Y level. I think the other thing is thinking thoughtfully about what those next steps might be, irregardless of what the next donation level might be. I mean, that's something that, particularly since the economic fluctuation has been in place here over the past few years, our teams have tried to really focus on two things. One, moving from the transactional to the experiential, which Greg talked about a little bit before in the benefits model. So moving from that, you know, I am giving because of X benefit, to understanding the impact of their support. And then really asking them to consider nominal increases that would be meaningful to them but not necessarily get them to the next donor level. And then alternating those so that for 1 year perhaps you're at, you know, $250. The next donor giving level is $500. You might ask for 2 years to go up to $300, and then $400, and then the next year, and you're talking about the case for support and those requests, the next year might be $500 where the letter is touting the benefits. So you have a little bit of an ebb and flow of what your donor motivation is on the broad level, and then on the top end of the pyramid, really being specific and patient, and knowing when, you know, if you're putting all the research but you're not seeing the return on the investment, that it might not be the priority for that year. You might need to look at a long view with that person.
Brooke, thank you. We have, we're going to open it up for questions from the audience right now. We have a couple of interesting questions that are popping up on the screen. One of them is, how would you suggest engaging donors with your organization if your services to clients are confidential? Yeah. Let me just jump in and Brooke, Greg, and encourage you to jump in as well. I'm assuming this may be some kind of counseling situation where, you know, maybe there's a way where you can engage your donors with the staff who work with those clients. Maybe they role play what a session is like, so your donors have an opportunity to see what goes into that kind of interaction. But certainly using other people, other program staff to interact with your donors gives them a sense of what your organization is all about.
Yep, I would add,
Go ahead, Greg.
you know, I've been involved in an organization called the AIDS Legal Council here in Chicago, which is certainly dealing with confidential, you know, issues, and I think they've been masterful in bringing people together and not talking about specific cases. I mean, maybe once a case is finished and there's something that can be made public, you know, it's wonderful to share those victories and those positive movements, but I think there's opportunity to talk about, you know, just broad general policy issues, and if you've got you know, some really smart volunteers or attorneys that can talk about the work that they're doing in general terms and how this really does impact all of us. So you take it away from the, this is impacting one person, but this really connects, you know, it's part of what make us, you know, make us all human. And, you know, right now you might not be needing these services, but none of us can predict the path that our life is going to take. And I think they've done, you know, a very respectful way of dealing with, you know, difficult topics in small sort of intimate gatherings, breakfasts and in lunches that really have advanced them and helped them to increase their fundraising.
I agree, Greg. It's such an interesting point, right, that we do have access, whatever the nature of our institution is, to leaders on a local or national level who are really figuring out what are the issues and what are the potential solutions out there. And you know, you find that our donors and board members are very passionately connected to our work. And so to provide them access to those leaders in the field is another benefit of their association with your organization.
We have another question from the audience. This person wants to know more about giving gifts to donors when they reach certain levels. This is not quite the tchotchke question, but really when, go ahead.
I'm trying to think of when we've not, I mean, and so I guess the question, the way that I'm interpreting the question is if you are trying to have a donor move from point X on your giving pyramid to point Y, and then they do that, how are you acknowledging that increased gift? You know, and we have done that through, again, you know, the personal thank you, the acknowledging that it is an increased gift in this economy. You know, they have made us a priority. But then at certain giving levels, our Bard Circle Society, which is for us, we have sort of marked that is the level where it goes from sort of broad-based fundraising to very personalized. We have created an incentive piece that goes out to, or I guess it's a thank you piece that goes out to them once a year with a membership card confirming their benefits and really reaffirming the personal connection they have to us. And so we, you know, it's an extra step to the thank you process. It's really reinforcing that their membership gives them access to our organization at a different level. Greg, do you have more specific examples on your end?
Well, I think the gifting.
Greg, I'm going to jump in and say we've got about 30 seconds left.
Okay, I think gifting to major donors, it only should be done if it's a gift that has some sort of relationship to mission and content. I don't think donors want flowers. You know, they don't want their money spent turning around giving them something that they could easily buy themselves. So I think it really is that experiential and opportunity is much more meaningful. I think sometimes a little gift can create an opportunity for a conversation to take place that might not have taken place. So that's, but that can happen with a little handwritten note. I think a handwritten note is a gift these days.
Guys, when we talk to donors about their involvement with organizations, we hear a lot about the importance of handwritten notes. It's kind of a lost art, and it really makes a difference. I'm going to, just before I turn this back to Sarah Barnes to wrap up, I'm just going to remind you about the importance of these donors to your organization. I refer to them as a living endowment. If you just think about it, a $1,000 donor to your organization is the equivalent of a $20,000 endowment fund. And if you treat those donors right, they're not going to go underwater, and they're probably likely to continue to support you over time and hopefully include your organization in their estate plan so that they keep on giving even when they're no longer around. And that's truly the ultimate gift. So with that, I want to thank Brooke and Greg for being a part of this discussion today. It's been very energizing and exciting, and turn it over to Sarah to wrap up.
Well, thank you, Edith. This was great, and thank you for everyone who joined us today, and a special thank you to our panelists. Again, if you have any extra questions, please feel free to email us at webinars@campbellcompany.com. We'll make sure those answers or those questions get answered. And you can use the code member76 and receive complimentary access to next month's webinar, which is called How to Build Philanthropic Relationships with Your Professional Societies, Members, and Corporate Members. You can register on our website at campbellcompany.com. And again, thank you very much to everyone. And from all of us here at Campbell & Company, we hope you have a great Thanksgiving holiday. Take care.